The moment my sister laughed at me in front of everyone, something in me went quiet. "A Navy job?" Amanda said, her voice dripping with the kind of pity that burns worse than hate. "Joanne, you make it sound so serious, like you actually matter out there." They all laughed. I didn't. I just held her gaze long enough for the room to feel colder. She didn't know that hours earlier. I'd given an order that could move a fleet. She didn't care. That was the night I realized family can wound deeper than any enemy, and silence can cut sharper than revenge. My name is Joanne Whitaker, and that was the last time I let anyone mistake my silence for weakness. The air inside the ballroom was sweet with perfume and champagne, the kind of scent that clings to expensive rooms and fragile pride. Laughter rolled across the marble floor like a practiced melody, perfectly timed to every social cue. I stood near the open doors, close enough to feel the salt wind coming in from Charleston Harbor, far enough to breathe. The reception was everything Amanda had promised the world it would be. Flawless, glittering, expensive for the sake of being expensive. Lily, her daughter, glowed in a dress that could pay for a small house. I was proud of her in a quiet, private way. But I already knew this evening wasn't about love. It was about image. Amanda spotted me before I could slip away. She moved toward me like a hostess rehearsed for years in other people's approval. Her laughter already fixed in place. "Joanne, there you are!" she called out, glass of champagne raised like a weapon dressed in crystal. She looped her arm through mine and pulled me into the circle around the table. Faces turned. The noise dimmed just enough for the introduction she'd been waiting to make. "Everyone, this is my sister. She used to work for the Navy, mostly office stuff. You know, paperwork, scheduling, making sure the sailors got their lunch on time." They laughed. It was a gentle, harmless sound on the surface, the kind that still cuts. Not because it's cruel, but because it's so casual. The kind that says we already decided who you are. I smiled the way one does when a storm passes too far out at sea to matter. My fingers brushed the rim of my glass, and I lifted it just slightly in a polite toast. The music resumed. The conversation turned elsewhere, and Amanda beamed as if she'd saved me from saying something inconvenient. They didn't notice that I hadn't said anything at all. I stayed for a while, long enough to be seen, to nod at the right moments, to let them build the version of me they preferred. Then I slipped back toward the open doors, toward the edge of the terrace where the noise thinned out and the harbor spread wide under the moon. Out there, the water shimmered like liquid metal. Far in the distance, I could make out the faint outline of a destroyer moving across the horizon, steady and soundless. I knew its pattern by heart, the rhythm of its lights, the measured turn of its prow. It was a small, silent reminder that there was a world beyond this room, a world where precision mattered more than gossip. Behind me, the band started another song, one of those jazzy standards that sound cheerful enough to hide every uncomfortable pause between people pretending to care. Amanda's laughter carried above the crowd again. "Jo's never really been into family stuff," she said. "She's a little married to her job." A few polite laughs followed, then the scrape of cutlery. Another toast. I looked down at my glass, the bubbles gone flat, and wondered how long I could stand the noise before the part of me that still belonged to the ocean would walk straight out into it. In the Navy, silence means discipline, focus, control. Out here, it only makes people underestimate you. Maybe that was why I let them. It was easier for them to feel comfortable believing I was small. The night carried on in gold and laughter, the perfect portrait of a family at ease. Yet standing there, I felt the faint vibration under my feet from the harbor cranes shifting somewhere beyond the pier. The world they ignored was moving, alive, immense, and I was part of it. I leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on the destroyer until it vanished into the dark. That ship, that quiet command pulsing across the sea, was real. This party wasn't. I took a slow sip from my glass, the taste gone warm and bitter, and let the noise behind me blur into nothing. Inside that hall, I was the odd sister with the unglamorous job. Out here, under the steady hum of the Atlantic, I remembered what silence really meant. They never asked what I truly did, maybe because they couldn't bear what it would say about them if they knew. 2 weeks before the wedding, my phone buzzed in the middle of the night. Amanda's name lit the screen, the kind of call that only comes when someone wants something, Joe, about the wedding. Her voice was syrupy and nervous all at once. It's just, could you not wear your uniform? People might feel intimidated, especially Robert Langley. He's very traditional. I glanced at the clock. 22:45. The hum of air conditioning filled the secure conference room around me. A windowless space at the Washington Navy Yard where no one breathed too loud. On the wall-sized display in front of me, the Atlantic spread in a grid of light. Every ship, every flight path, every moving piece of the operation I was running. Understood, I said evenly. I could almost hear her relief through the line. Good. Just tell people you work in logistics or admin or whatever. It'll be easier for everyone. When the call ended, I let the silence settle. 6 officers were waiting across the table. Eyes forward, patient, disciplined. None of them needed to know what that conversation was about. Family wasn't part of the chain of command. Still, the words clung like salt on skin. Easier for everyone. Amanda never realized how she made herself sound, like my existence was a potential embarrassment that needed to be managed. My sister wanted me invisible, but some things don't stay unseen forever. I turned back to the main screen and entered a command code. The map shifted, replaced by contractor data, shipyards, equipment suppliers, vendors currently flagged for review. One name blinked red across the list. Langley Marine Systems. For a moment, I just stared. I opened the file. The numbers unfolded line by line. Defective sonar readings, understrength hull plating, unverified pressure tests. Each entry was a small fracture, but together they spelled catastrophe, waiting for water. A red warning banner flashed. Pending performance review. Approval required by Vice Admiral Whitaker. I leaned back in my chair, the irony slicing through the fatigue. Amanda's soon-to-be in-laws weren't just any company. They were mine to approve, to investigate, to possibly shut down. The same man she was desperate to impress was already on my desk for failing the Navy's integrity standards. I locked the file and let out a slow breath. Around me, the team began collecting documents, waiting for final orders. I dismissed them with a nod, and one by one they filed out, the door sealing behind them with a soft click. The quiet that followed was dense. I sat there in the glow of the monitor, thinking about the absurdity of it all, how my sister's fear of social discomfort had just collided with federal ethics violations. She wanted me small so her world could stay polished. But now, her world and mine had become the same battlefield. I looked toward the dark window. My reflection stared back, half-shadowed by the cold light of the room. Behind that reflection, somewhere past the city skyline, lay the Atlantic, massive, unbothered, incapable of lying. Fine, I thought. I'll play along. I shut off the monitor. The sudden darkness filled the room like a tide coming in, but the sea has a way of pulling everything to the surface. I was born in Charleston, in a family that prized reputation over character. In our house, appearances were a kind of currency, measured in dinner invitations, polite smiles, and what other people whispered after they left the room. By the time our parents were gone, the rules were already carved into us. Success wasn't about purpose, it was about perception. Amanda learned that faster than I did. She was radiant even back then, always knowing how to catch the right eyes, how to turn charm into leverage. She found security in the promises of men with golf memberships and business cards printed in silver. I found mine in something colder, harder, and infinitely more honest. While she memorized cocktail etiquette, I memorized wind speed and radar coordinates. Our paths split cleanly after the funeral. She went looking for safety. I went looking for silence. She threw herself into Charleston's social scene, charity galas, champagne brunches, photographs in magazines where she always looked like she was laughing at something beneath her. I threw myself into the sea, what she called noise. I called freedom, the hum of engines, the sharp smell of diesel, the command deck alive with movement. Those became my home. Orders came through radios like heartbeat rhythms, each syllable precise, clipped, alive. When the last command was given and the ocean stretched out in stillness, that was the kind of peace I understood. We wrote less over the years. Then we stopped altogether. The distance wasn't measured in miles. It was in how differently we defined meaning. Still, when she needed help, I sent it, quietly. I paid Lily's tuition when the scholarships fell through. When her husband's father grew sick, The bills that Amanda couldn't cover somehow disappeared. She thanked me once through a short text that said simply, "You didn't have to." Then she told everyone else that I traveled a lot for work. That was her favorite story about me, that I was somewhere else, doing something vague. It was easier than saying her sister had chosen a life she couldn't understand. I let her believe it. It kept the peace, and peace was efficient. One morning in D.C., I finished a briefing at the command center just as the city's first light crept through the glass facade of the building. The reflection caught me off guard. For a second, I saw what the rest of them refused to see: a crisp white uniform, the faint glint of 3 silver stars at my collar, and a face that had aged not from vanity, but from responsibility. They'd rather see me as small than face what I became. The thought came uninvited, calm and true. The elevator doors opened behind me. 2 junior officers stepped out, their voices low, respectful. "Ma'am?" "Good morning, Admiral." I nodded, but my mind was still somewhere else, back in Charleston. Hearing Amanda's laugh cut through the air of that reception hall. Respect, I realized, couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned, and then demonstrated until it couldn't be ignored. But family didn't measure value the way the Navy did. They wanted simplicity, not truth. Maybe the only way to make them see was to hold up the mirror themselves, make them confront the reflection they'd spent years avoiding. As the elevator doors closed, the faint gleam of metal in my reflection curved into something I hadn't worn in years. A smile. Not the polite kind I gave at family dinners. This one was colder, precise, and perfectly still, like the ocean right before a storm decides where to break. The rain hadn't stopped since I landed back in Washington. It slicked across the streets in thin, silver veins that caught every bit of light before swallowing it again. From my window, the Potomac looked like a ghost. Gray, silent, moving as if it carried the city's secrets under its current. 3 days had passed since Amanda's call, but her words still echoed like static in the back of my mind. "Don't wear your uniform. Don't make people uncomfortable." She said it like she was asking for peace, but it felt like a request for erasure. I shook off the thought as I entered the steel and glass facade of the Naval Intelligence Command. The security officer at the gate snapped to attention when he saw my ID, his eyes darting once to the insignia on my coat. Inside, the air was colder, cleaner, too disciplined to allow distraction. I logged into the secure mainframe, Blue Sentinel. The system greeted me with the soft hum of authorization, lines of encrypted data flooding the screen. My objective was clear: review contractor performance for ongoing defense projects. One name glowed red across the list, pulsing like a heartbeat: Langley Marine Systems. A flicker of unease tightened my chest. I opened the file. Lines of technical data scrolled down, sterile and damning. Sonar arrays deviating from safety tolerances by nearly a full percentage point. Pressure hull composites failing stress tests at simulated depths. Inspection reports missing mandatory sign-offs. Every entry was a quiet betrayal dressed in bureaucracy. Each one represented a potential disaster waiting beneath the surface. If I approved this, the Navy risked lives. If I rejected it, Amanda's social world would implode. Her daughter's new in-laws, Charleston's golden family, would fall from grace, and she'd never forgive me. For a long moment, I sat still. The glow of the screen reflected in the polished table. The silence of the room pressed in. I could almost hear the rain sliding down the windows, steady and relentless. I had spent a lifetime being the reasonable one, the sister who kept the peace, who let the mockery slide because it was easier than correcting it. But this wasn't a family spat. This was integrity with a body count. They wanted me to play small. I'll play smart instead. I hit save on the report and reached for the comm panel. Within seconds, Rear Admiral Harris's face appeared on the encrypted line. Back straight, waiting. "Prepare a full brief on Langley Marine," I told him. "Deadline, the 14th. I'll be attending a private event that day. Bring your dress whites." He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. In the Navy, silence often means comprehension. "Understood, Admiral," he said, and the line went dark. The following days blurred together in paperwork and long corridors. Washington wore its usual color, steel over steel. The city always looked cleanest when it was hiding something. 3 days later, A classified message arrived through my secure channel. It wasn't from a superior, but from a liaison, a man whose career depended on smoothing things over for defense contractors. The email was polite, polished, and poisonous. If you could show some flexibility, Madam Vice Admiral, it would help the Navy too. I read it twice, then typed 2 sentences in response. Integrity doesn't bend, it breaks. Then I deleted the message. Outside my office, the sky cracked open in a low growl of thunder. The storm rolled across the Potomac as if to remind the city who truly commanded it. I turned off the lights and stood by the window. Down at the naval yard, rows of destroyers gleamed under floodlights, perfect and precise. Ships didn't care for politics. They obeyed the laws of pressure, gravity, and truth. Somewhere in Charleston, Amanda was probably tasting cakes and arguing about centerpieces. I was reviewing sonar data and supply chains. We'd always existed in parallel universes, but now those worlds were colliding. Her social climbing against my command structure. I chose the only side that ever made sense. When I left the office, the air smelled like electricity and metal. The storm had broken, washing the streets raw. I walked toward my car without an umbrella, letting the rain erase the last trace of compromise from my thoughts. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Amanda. Don't make it weird this weekend, okay? Mr. Langley is a big deal. Just be nice. I stared at the words for a long time before setting the phone face down on the desk. The same hand that once wrote orders to mobilize thousands of sailors now refused to type even a single reply. Instead, I opened the operations dashboard on my tablet and adjusted the schedule for an upcoming naval exercise. The change was small, elegant, barely a ripple in the larger plan, but enough. The fleet's destroyer group would pass within sight of Charleston's coastline on the same day as the wedding. One keystroke, one confirmation, the order transmitted through secure channels, reaching the commanding officer aboard USS Ticonderoga within seconds. On his bridge, someone would be acknowledging my directive, rerouting course, checking coordinates against the tides. Let's make the timing perfect. It wasn't about intimidation. It was alignment, principle meeting opportunity. A silent reminder that justice doesn't hide, even when civility demands it. I closed the tablet and looked out the window once more. The storm had cleared, but the air still carried the taste of salt, faint and electric. Out there, beyond the horizon, the destroyer was already moving, steady, silent, obeying orders that no one in Charleston would ever understand until it was too late. 2 days before the wedding, I returned to Charleston. The city was hot and golden, the air thick with salt and magnolia. I checked into a quiet hotel near the harbor, the kind that smelled faintly of old wood and polished brass. From my window, the water glimmered like liquid glass. Ships came and went. Tugboats groaned in the distance. Somewhere out there, I knew, the USS Ticonderoga was closing in on schedule. Amanda arrived that afternoon, dressed like a magazine cover, hair perfect, perfume expensive, smile rehearsed. She swept into the lobby like she owned it, wrapped her arms around me, and then immediately pulled back to fix a strand of my hair, as if correcting a display. Her eyes searched my face for something. Obedience, maybe. And when she found a version of it, she relaxed. "Joe, promise me you'll behave," she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound caring instead of controlling. "No work talk, no Navy stuff. Just smile, okay?" I kept my tone light. "I'll behave." It was the truth, just not in the way she imagined. Her relief was almost touching. She smiled the way a person smiles after they've successfully tamed a storm they never understood. To her, my cooperation meant safety. To me, it meant strategy. Compliance can be camouflage if you know how to wear it. That night, the harbor fog rolled in thick and slow. From my hotel window, the water turned to steel. I opened my laptop, keyed into the secure network, and found Harris's report waiting, marked urgent. The data unfolded in clean, merciless lines. Langley Marine hadn't just made technical errors. They'd falsified inspection records and downgraded materials to save money. It was greed wrapped in paperwork, the kind that kills men quietly before anyone notices. If I exposed them, the contract, billions in logistics and fleet maintenance, would freeze. Factories would halt. Employees would panic. And my sister's new family would collapse under the weight of public humiliation. If I stayed silent, I'd be complicit in a failure that could sink sailors at sea. I didn't feel anger anymore, only fatigue. A long, heavy kind of exhaustion that lives in your bones when you've carried too much truth for too long. They built their comfort on my silence. Time to make that silence work for me. I composed a short message to Harris. Deliver the full brief in person at 1700 hours. Saturday. Formal attire. His reply came within seconds. Aye, ma'am. That was the thing about trust in my world. It didn't need explanation. It needed execution. The night deepened. I poured a glass of water and sat by the window, watching the harbor lights blink in perfect rhythm. The sound of a horn drifted across the bay. Deep, resonant, familiar. Somewhere beyond the fog, the destroyer was moving into position, silent and deliberate. By morning, the city had shaken off its haze. The day of the wedding was impossibly bright, sunlight bouncing off every white surface until it hurt to look. Amanda had outdone herself. The venue overlooked the water, draped in gold accents, expensive flowers, and the kind of confidence that only money can fake. I chose a navy blue dress, simple, understated, long enough to be proper, soft enough to blend in, no insignia, no medals, no clues. When Amanda saw me step through the lobby, her face lit up like she'd won. See? Perfect. You finally look normal, exactly how I planned. I said. She thought I meant the dress. I meant the entire night. We rode to the venue in silence, her chatting idly with the driver while scrolling through messages. I stared out the window, watching the horizon beyond the bridge. The line where sky met sea was faint, blurred by heat. If anyone looked close enough, they might notice a small formation of ships far out, too distant to mean anything, too close to be coincidence. At the reception, I moved through the crowd like a shadow. Smiles, polite nods, meaningless conversation. Years of diplomacy in uniform had trained me well for this kind of theater. Amanda floated through her guests with the grace of a politician, and for once, I didn't mind her performance. It made me invisible, just the way I needed to be. Robert Langley stood at the center of it all, confident, heavy with self-importance. The kind of man whose handshake was a declaration and whose smile never reached his eyes. When our gazes met across the room, his expression shifted just slightly. Curiosity flickered beneath arrogance. He knew my name. Of course, but not my position. Not yet. We exchanged a polite nod, the kind that meant nothing to him but everything to me. He saw a sister of the bride, quiet and forgettable. I saw the man whose company I would dismantle by morning. The string quartet started playing, champagne poured, toasts rose and fell. I blended into the crowd, careful not to draw notice. Every detail was unfolding exactly as I'd arranged. As the sun began to set, the water outside turned the color of pewter. Through the glass walls of the ballroom, I caught the faintest gleam of light reflecting off steel. A ship's signal, low and deliberate, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. The Ticonderoga had arrived, right on time. I stepped out to the terrace for air. The harbor wind whipped through my hair, carrying the scent of salt and fuel. My reflection shimmered in the glass behind me. Blue dress, calm posture, polite smile. To everyone inside, I was docile, subdued, finally conforming. Right on schedule, I murmured to myself. The destroyer's lights winked once more across the darkening sea. Somewhere aboard that ship, my orders were already being executed. Tomorrow, Langley Marine's world would tilt on its axis. Tonight, though, I would let them celebrate their illusion, let them laugh, let them believe they'd finally tamed me. The real storm hadn't even reached shore yet. The Charleston sun hit the lawn like a spotlight, the kind that flatters everything until you get close enough to see the cracks. White flowers lined the edges of the reception area, gold ribbons fluttered in the warm wind, and the air smelled faintly of champagne and salt. The sea glittered just beyond the tent, calm and endless, pretending not to know what was about to happen here. I made my way through the crowd, heels sinking slightly into the soft grass, faces blurring into polite smiles and empty laughter. My seat was at a side table, close enough to watch, far enough to be forgotten. From there, I could see it all. Amanda directing the photographer like a general in heels. Lily glowing in her lace gown. The men in dark suits clinking glasses around Robert Langley. He held court easily, voice carrying, posture polished. The kind of man who believed rooms existed to orbit him. As dinner began, Amanda spotted me from across the lawn. Her smile widened, practiced and bright. She crossed the space with her wineglass raised, and that same tone she'd always used when she wanted something to look perfect. Come on, Joe, you never socialize. At least pretend to enjoy it. So I did. I smiled, let her lead me to the main table, and took the seat she'd clearly been saving, for decoration more than company. The table sparkled with silverware and false warmth. I folded the napkin across my lap and waited for the noise to settle. Langley was already mid-story, gesturing with his wine like a conductor. When he noticed me, he smiled the way some men do before they test a boundary. We were just discussing naval contracts. Ms. Whitaker, he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. You ever deal with that sort of thing in your paperwork job? The laughter came on cue. Not cruel. Exactly. Just comfortable. Familiar. The kind of laughter that assumes you're not the one who belongs. I lifted my water glass, the condensation slick against my fingers, and took a slow sip before answering. Not really paperwork, I said softly. Different kind of command. It was almost too gentle to be a warning, but the silence that followed was instant. Langley's grin faltered just enough for me to notice. He didn't know it, but that was his first signal. The kind of coded message only someone used to power could recognize too late. Lily broke the pause with a bright, practiced laugh. Mom says Aunt Jo used to handle Navy schedules and lunch menus. The table roared, silver forks clinked, wine sloshed, the collective relief of laughter filling the air again. I didn't join in. My eyes drifted to the wide glass windows beyond the patio. The ocean stretched endless and blue-gray, and far on the horizon, where the light met water, a series of faint flashes pulsed once, twice. The USS Ticonderoga, right on position. I looked back at the table, still smiling that polite, unfazed smile they'd all come to expect from me. No, I said, my voice even but sharp enough to cut through their laughter. I don't plan lunches, I plan operations. It was quiet after that. Langley's hand froze halfway to his mouth. The faintest color drained from his face. The laughter thinned into awkward coughs, the kind that can't find air to recover. For a long moment, all I heard was the rustle of the ribbons outside and the low hum of the band trying to keep the mood alive. Langley's eyes flicked down to my collarbone. He'd noticed the necklace, the small, understated chain I never took off. 3 silver stars gleamed against the navy fabric of my dress, catching the golden light. That necklace, he started, his voice unsteady. Half a question, half a warning. Gift from work, I said simply, meeting his gaze. It landed like a whisper, but carried like thunder. He swallowed hard. The movement of his throat was slow, deliberate. A man trying to decide if he'd just made a mistake in front of an audience. I kept my expression neutral, the smile still there but hollowed of warmth. Amanda, sensing something she couldn't quite name, rushed to fill the silence. She laughed too brightly, waving her hand as if swatting away tension. Let's not talk about work tonight. This is supposed to be fun. Fun! The word felt almost foreign. The band struck up another song, strings soft and sugary. People tried to move on, chatting again, pretending the air wasn't heavy, but they avoided looking at me now. The laughter had cracked. Something unseen but undeniable had shifted. I let them. From where I sat, I could see the faint reflection of the harbor lights through the glass. The horizon had darkened, the last of the sunset melting into steel-blue dusk. Somewhere out there, the Ticonderoga glided across the surface, right on schedule, the pulse of its deck lights steady and silent. Inside, Langley refilled his glass with shaking hands. Amanda leaned closer to whisper something to him, her smile too tight, her eyes darting toward me. Lily looked down at her plate, the color gone from her cheeks. I picked up my glass again, calm, deliberate, and let my gaze drift back toward the window. The destroyer's light flashed once more, almost like acknowledgement. Not yet, I thought, but soon. The band changed tempo, and the waiters began to bring out dessert. The air had turned heavier, thicker. No one at the table dared bring up work again. Not naval contracts, not anything. They thought the storm had passed. They hadn't realized yet. They were sitting at its eye. The sound of glass rang one last time, crisp and hollow. before the chandeliers dimmed to a warm gold glow. The room shifted into that easy hush that comes before another toast, another round of meaningless laughter. But instead, a low voice cut through the noise from behind me, steady, commanding, and unmistakable. "Vice Admiral Whitaker, ma'am." Every conversation in the ballroom stopped mid-breath. Forks froze halfway to mouths. I turned toward the voice. Rear Admiral Harris stood at the doorway in full dress whites, the metal bars across his chest gleaming like cold fire. His presence didn't belong here, not among silk gowns and champagne. But that was the point. In his left hand, he held a locked briefcase. In his right, the calm authority of someone who knew exactly what storm he was about to walk into. All eyes turned from him to me. The silence was electric, the kind that hums right before thunder. "SecNav's office requests your immediate authorization on Project Atlantic Shield. Ma'am, your review report is ready." He said it clearly, his voice cutting through the perfumed air like a knife through glass. Langley's smile cracked. His fingers tightened around the stem of his glass until it gave a small, fragile sound. Amanda's face went pale, the color draining as quickly as the room's false warmth. Lily gasped, her hand shaking so hard she dropped her wine flute. The sharp clink echoed like punctuation. "Vice Admiral?" Langley's voice stumbled over the words. "You heard him," I said. The air went still. Somewhere outside, a wave hit the shore, the sound faint but distinct, as if the sea itself was listening. Harris walked forward with measured precision and placed the briefcase on the center of the table. He flicked the latches open, the sound loud enough to fill the silence. Inside, under the golden light, was a neatly stacked file stamped in bold red. "Confidential, Mr. Langley," I began. "These are the performance metrics from your last contract submission." He hesitated, then reached for the file. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. The numbers didn't lie. Defective readings, failed pressure tests, missing verification signatures. His eyes darted across the evidence, searching for an escape that wasn't there. This can't be right," he said, voice cracking under the weight of realization. "It's exactly right," I interrupted, my tone flat, steady. "And it's why your company is now under formal review." Amanda found her voice before anyone else could. "Joanne, what are you doing? This is Lily's wedding." "No," I said evenly, looking straight at her. "This is accountability." The words fell like stones in still water. Ripples of silence moved through the crowd, spreading outward until even the band stopped pretending to play. Harris stood behind me, tall and unyielding. The light from the chandelier caught his uniform just so, the white fabric reflecting like a blade. To anyone watching, he was less a man and more an embodiment of the Navy itself. Formal, disciplined, absolute. I unlocked my tablet, fingers gliding over the screen as I entered my credentials. The digital verification sequence blinked green. The system prompted for final authorization. I pressed confirm. A soft tone pinged through the device. "Authorization complete." I looked up. Project Atlantic Shield's contract with Langley Marine is suspended pending correction of safety violations. No one moved. Langley stared at the floor, shoulders hunched, his earlier arrogance gone, replaced by a quiet collapse. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, almost small. "Admiral, I understand." I nodded once. The room felt too bright, too sharp. Dozens of faces stared at me. Faces that had laughed hours ago. Faces that now couldn't decide whether to respect or fear what stood before them. Every eye in that hall saw me clearly for the first time. The illusion they had built, that I was safe to belittle, simple to define, was gone. I rose from my seat, the scrape of my chair impossibly loud in the hush. I looked around at them, my sister, my niece, the guests who had smirked through their champagne. My voice was calm, almost soft. Carry on with the celebration. The Navy just concluded its business. And with that, I turned and walked toward the exit. Harris followed at my shoulder, pausing only to give a crisp salute before we stepped into the corridor. Behind us, the heavy doors closed with a muted thud, sealing off the room that had become a battlefield. The muffled music resumed, uneven, hesitant, as if even the band wasn't sure whether to continue. The laughter didn't return. The party went on, but something essential in it had died. Outside, the night air hit cool against my skin, sharp with the scent of the harbor. The wind carried faint echoes of the waves striking the pier, the same rhythm that had steadied me my whole life. I didn't look back. There was no satisfaction in what I'd done, no thrill of revenge, only the steady calm that follows when justice finally takes shape. I had executed a duty, nothing more. The consequences belonged to those who had mistaken my silence for weakness. The door behind me opened briefly. Harris stepped out, closing it gently. He straightened his posture and glanced at me. "All done, ma'am." "Yes," I said quietly, watching the harbor lights flicker against the black water. "All done." He gave a respectful nod and walked beside me toward the edge of the pier. In the distance, the destroyer's lights gleamed like a constellation, steady and exact, right on schedule. The world I lived in didn't need applause. It needed precision. Inside the ballroom, they would try to laugh again, to toast, to pretend nothing had cracked. But they'd remember this night every time someone mentioned my name. I didn't need to destroy their world. The truth had already done it for me. The wind off Charleston Harbor hit sharp and fast when I stepped outside, carrying that familiar blend of salt, diesel, and storm that always came before something irreversible. My dress whipped lightly against my legs, the sound of the sea just beyond the terrace railing a low and steady hum. Across the dark water, the destroyer USS Ticonderoga glided into view, its searchlight slicing through the night like a silver blade. For a moment, it illuminated the clouds in clean white arcs, then vanished again, as if to remind me that precision and silence often hold the same power. Harris stood beside me, cap tucked neatly under one arm. He didn't say anything right away. The noise of the reception inside drifted faintly through the heavy glass doors, the uncertain rhythm of a jazz band that had lost its tempo, the scattered murmurs of guests trying to convince themselves the evening wasn't unraveling. "Everything's in motion now," he said finally, his tone steady. "As it should be." I answered. We walked back into the ballroom. The air felt heavier now, thick with perfume and unease. The chandeliers glowed in soft gold, too warm for what the room had become. Conversation had resumed, but it was different. Muted, brittle, full of people pretending they hadn't just watched their comfortable world bend. The waiters moved slower than before, their trays trembling slightly. Even the sound of cutlery felt wrong, like echoes in a church. We stopped at a small table near the edge of the room, half cleared, the napkins still creased and untouched. Harris set down the locked briefcase, unclasped the latches, and pulled out the thick file with the red seal. He laid it on the table in full view of the guests, who were too afraid to look directly, but too curious to look away. The file was no longer just paper. It was a verdict. Langley appeared moments later, his face flushed beneath the golden lights, his collar open. The arrogance that once filled every inch of him now cracked at the edges. He hesitated before stepping closer, lowering his voice as though volume might somehow change the outcome. "Admiral, may we speak privately?" I didn't bother to stand. We already are. Harris opened the report to the final section, his gloved hands precise and deliberate. Under the lamplight, the columns of numbers came alive. Failure rates, pressure readings, omitted signatures, all the quiet betrayals that bureaucrats hope never find daylight. I tapped my finger against one of the pages. "Your sonar system failed the pressure test 3 times, I said evenly. "The welds don't meet Navy spec. If deployed, those hulls could implode before they even reach depth. Tell me, Mr. Langley, how many families do you think can afford your shortcuts?" His throat worked as he swallowed, sweat tracing a thin line along his temple. He tried to hold my gaze, but failed. "We'll fix it immediately," he said. "Please, this isn't necessary here. It's necessary everywhere integrity is questioned." The words hung there, clean and cold, for a few long seconds. Even the music stopped, as if it understood it had no place in this room anymore. Amanda stood a few feet away, her expression stunned and unreadable. Lily clung to her arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. Their perfect celebration, the one they'd built on reputation and appearances, was collapsing in real time, and neither of them could stop it. I looked at them both, not with anger, but but with the steady detachment of someone who has seen storms break and rebuild entire coast. "When you mocked what I do?" I said quietly. "You thought you were mocking a job. What you mocked was the command that keeps your world safe." No one spoke. The sound that filled the silence wasn't human. It was the slow, rhythmic crash of waves against the seawall outside. Measured and infinite. The heartbeat of something far greater than any of us. Langley's voice came out rough. "Vice Admiral, you have my word. This will be corrected by next quarter. See that you do," I replied. "Because next time, it won't be a review. It'll be termination." I stood, closing the file. The sharp snap of the binder echoed through the room like a gavel. Harris took the report, straightened his uniform, and saluted crisply. The sound of his heels striking the marble floor cut clean through the tension. Every eye followed us as we walked. The people who had spent their lives laughing through lies now sat frozen, their champagne glasses untouched, the bubbles long dead. The chandeliers above cast fractured reflections over their faces. Fear, disbelief, a dawning recognition that the world doesn't bend to charm. Amanda looked at me as I passed. She wanted to speak but couldn't. Lily reached for her mother's hand, and together they stood motionless, as though the weight of truth itself had pinned them to the floor. The silence was heavier than any speech could have been. I paused near the door and turned once more to the room that had been all glitter and laughter just an hour before. My voice was calm, steady. "Carry on with the celebration. The Navy just concluded its business." And then I walked out. The doors closed behind me with a soft, deliberate click. Harris followed, his stride even, his face impassive, inside. The muffled music started again, slow and uncertain, the band struggling to pretend the world hadn't shifted beneath their feet. We stepped out into the night. The air felt colder now, sharper, like something cleansed. Harris fell into step beside me, both of us silent, down at the pier. The destroyer's lights blinked once across the horizon, steady, deliberate, obedient to command. He stopped and faced me. "All done, ma'am?" he said quietly. "Yes," I said, watching the reflection of the ship ripple across the water. All done. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The harbor lights flickered across the black surface, each wave catching a piece of light and carrying it away. I thought about how fragile everything inside that ballroom had been, how dependent it was on illusion, on the comfort of lies. And then I thought about how strong the silence felt out here, how much more honest it was. The wind caught my hair, whipping it across my face, and I let it. Harris gave a small nod, then turned toward the car, waiting at the end of the path. I stayed behind, staring at the sea. The Ticonderoga's searchlight swept once more across the horizon, its beam finding the edge of the dock before disappearing into the black again. It reminded me of discipline, precise, unyielding, quietly devastating. Behind me, laughter tried to rise again inside the ballroom, a brittle echo of what it had been before. But it sounded hollow now, like something breaking in slow motion. They'd return to their lives, tell themselves I'd overreacted, convince each other the embarrassment would fade. But they'd remember this moment, the sound of my title in a room that had refused to see me, the sight of Harris in his whites, the look on Langley's face as the file opened. That was enough. I hadn't humiliated anyone. I hadn't raised my voice. I'd simply done my duty. And that, I realized, was what they could never forgive. Out on the horizon, the destroyer changed course, its lights sweeping in a final arc across the harbor. The movement was exact, on time, on target, executed without error, a silent affirmation that order still existed somewhere in the world. I turned toward the car. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of the sea against the stone embankment, slow, patient, unstoppable. When I looked back one last time, the ballroom was still lit in gold, beautiful and hollow, like a theater after the actors have gone. Inside, they would go on pretending. Out here, in the cool, sharp air of the harbor, the truth didn't need pretending. It stood on its own, unshaken. For the first time that night, I let the silence wash over me fully. It wasn't cold, it wasn't cruel, it was clarity. And when I finally walked away, the world behind me stayed small. By the next morning, the story had already moved through every corridor that mattered. Inside the Pentagon, It appeared in the Daily Defense Brief, filed under Internal Audit Notification. In the local Charleston paper, it appeared under a different headline entirely. Langley Marine Systems under review by Navy Procurement Office. They called it procedural, contained, routine. But in the halls of Defense Command, everyone knew who had signed the order. The email chain arrived at 0600. The top line read, Vice Admiral J. Whitaker, authorization confirmed. My name, my signature, my authority. I sat at the desk in my hotel room, the document glowing faintly on the tablet. The sunlight broke through the blinds in thin bars, cutting across the floor in perfect geometry. For once, the world outside was still. No elation, no adrenaline. Just a clean, quiet kind of lightness. 2 decades of being dismissed, underestimated, folded into the corner of someone else's story. And it had taken exactly 1 sentence to turn the balance. I hadn't needed to shout or fight. Silence, properly placed, had done the work for me. By noon, the congratulatory calls started coming in. A few from DAAC, staffers who wanted to attach themselves to success. Some from commanders who appreciated what I'd prevented. The Secretary of the Navy called just after lunch. Hell of a move. Whitaker, you saved us from a scandal. I kept my voice even. I did my job, sir. He laughed, a deep, unguarded sound that echoed against the brass of his office. That's what I like about you. No headlines, just results. When the call ended, I let the phone fall onto the bed and sat there for a moment, staring at the wall. Outside, Charleston was waking up into its usual rhythm. Gulls crying, waves pushing in, tourists gathering along the pier. I thought about Amanda somewhere across the city, probably replaying every second of the night before. Every look, every whispered conversation. For all her fear of humiliation, she had never understood that the truth doesn't humiliate. It exposes. That afternoon, I walked along the harbor to clear my head. The air was warm, thick with salt and humidity. Fishing boats drifted lazily across the water, somewhere out past the line where the Atlantic began. The Ticonderoga was already gone, moving north toward its next patrol. The horizon shimmered faintly, silver against the blue, like something erasing itself. By the time the sun set, I was back in my hotel room, the air conditioning humming steady and low. I made a cup of coffee, the kind that comes in paper pods, bitter, lifeless, but necessary. The window reflected the city lights below. Charleston looked soft at night, the kind of soft that hides its judgment. A knock came at the door. It wasn't sharp or urgent, just quiet, hesitant. I already knew who it was. When I opened it, Amanda stood there, wrapped in a long beige coat, eyes rimmed with red. She looked smaller without the armor of her social world. No heels, no pearls, no performance, just her. She hesitated in the doorway. You embarrassed me, she said finally, voice low and cracked. Everyone was talking. I set my cup down on the table. I didn't embarrass you. Amanda, I revealed you. She blinked, swallowing hard. You could have warned me, I sighed. I've been warning you my whole life. You just never listened, because you thought the uniform was decoration. Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time in years, she didn't have a retort ready. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the air vent. She moved to the chair by the window, sat down carefully, like her body had forgotten how to rest. Her hands trembled as she tried to find something to do with them. You ruined the wedding, she whispered. No, I reminded you what integrity looks like. Weddings end, reputations don't. The words weren't cruel, and they didn't need to be. They were simple, factual, and therefore impossible to escape. Amanda dropped her gaze, staring at her knees. The city light cut across her face through the blinds, striping her features with gold and shadow. Minutes passed in silence before she spoke again, her voice soft and thin. I didn't hate what you became. I hated that I never had the courage to be it. Something in her tone pulled me backward, through years of small dinners, of phone calls unanswered, of holidays spent pretending we were 2 halves of a family that never fit. It wasn't apology, not exactly. It was confession. I didn't say anything. I just walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her body tensed first, then relaxed under the weight of it. Go home. Amanda, take care of Lily. The rest will fix itself. She nodded once, tears gathering but not falling. She stood, smoothing her coat as if to rebuild what little composure she could salvage. For a moment, she lingered in the doorway, trying to find something else to say. But the words never came. She just left quietly. When the door closed, the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I turned off the lamp and sat in the half-dark, the sound of the city faint beyond the glass. Somewhere across the water, a cargo ship's horn moaned low and distant, a long, tired exhale from a world still turning. On the nightstand, my tablet buzzed with notifications, articles from news outlets, messages from command. A note from Harris confirming that all the review materials had been filed with naval procurement. I scrolled through them briefly, then stopped on a line from Admiral. Defense Bulletin. Langley Marine's suspension, while expected to be temporary, highlights the Navy's ongoing commitment to accountability and transparency under Vice Admiral J. Whitaker's oversight. I stared at the sentence until the words blurred. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like alignment, something finally sitting where it was supposed to. I powered off the screen and poured the last of my coffee into the sink. The TV played softly in the background, a local anchor's voice bright and detached. Langley Marine Systems has been suspended pending federal review. No official comment from company representatives. The next story was about a new restaurant opening downtown. The world, it seemed, had already moved on. That realization didn't sting. It felt right. Justice was never supposed to be loud. It just needed to work. I pulled open the balcony door, stepping into the night. The air hit cool against my skin. The harbor stretched before me, calm, unbothered, as if it hadn't just mirrored the unraveling of an entire family's illusion less than 24 hours earlier. I leaned on the railing, watching the dark water roll against the pier. The lights from nearby ships blinked slowly in the distance, red, white, steady, disciplined, each one obeying a pattern that no one questioned, because structure meant safety. The reflection in the glass door behind me showed a figure I barely recognized, not because she had changed, but because she had finally stopped shrinking to fit other people's comfort. The truth of that moment settled quietly in my chest. For years, I'd let silence protect them. Last night, I'd let silence do something else, speak for itself. My phone buzzed again. A message from Harris. All reports filed. "Congratulations, ma'am," I typed back. "Well done, Commander." Then I turned the screen face down and let the world go dim again. A gust of wind lifted the sheer curtains, sending a ripple of cool air through the room. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of salt, metal, and distant rain. Amanda's words returned. "I didn't hate what you became. I hated that I never had the courage to be it." There was no anger left in me, not anymore. Only understanding. Maybe forgiveness isn't something you give. Maybe it's something that happens when the truth stops needing to be defended. Down by the docks, the water lapped rhythmically against the hulls, that eternal pulse of order in chaos. I thought about the men and women under my command, about how they carried out their duties unseen, without praise or applause. That was the kind of power I respected. Quiet, relentless. I went back inside, turning off the lights. The city beyond the glass looked smaller now, its noise distant and harmless. For a moment, I stood in front of the mirror, the faint reflection of my face. The silver insignia still glinting at my collar caught the glow of the harbor lights. I had spent years letting people define me by what they feared I was not. Feminine enough, simple enough, soft enough. But the uniform was never about hardness. It was about bearing weight without complaint, about doing the right thing even when it cost you peace. Peace, I thought, was never given. It's earned, one decision, one silence, one truth at a time. When I finally lay down, the room felt impossibly still. Outside, the harbor whispered, its rhythm steady and eternal. Tomorrow, the Navy would move forward. Langley Marine would rebuild, and Amanda would tell her version of the story to anyone who would listen. But beneath it all, the current had already shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't invisible. I was simply free. And freedom, I realized, isn't the absence of noise. It's the ability to stand in silence and not need to explain. A year later, The wind in Virginia still carried salt and ceremony. The sky above Naval Station Norfolk was a perfect, relentless blue, the kind of morning that demanded attention. The sun was high, hard, unblinking, gleaming against rows of white uniforms lined in flawless formation. The stars and stripes snapped sharply above us, its sound slicing through the air like a drumbeat. I stood on the reviewing stand, the brim of my white cap catching the light. The gold trim glared against the sunlight, and the heat pressed against my skin in waves. Around me, the hum of precision filled the air, the synchronized movement of hundreds of sailors standing at attention, boots aligned, eyes forward, breath steady. The brass band struck the first note of the anthem, and the sound rose strong and clear, rolling over the pier and out toward the open sea. The moment always felt the same, sacred, grounding. I lifted my hand to salute, palm flat, motion exact, a gesture I had repeated more times than I could count, and still, every time, it reminded me why I stayed. When the last note faded, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was respect. The ceremony concluded with applause and the low murmur of voices, but my eyes drifted beyond the crowd, to the row of guest chairs behind the cordon line. Amanda stood there, wind catching the edge of her plain navy dress. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair, unstyled, blew freely in the sea breeze. Beside her, Lily stood taller than before, her hand gripping her mother's. Both of them looked out of place among the suits and medals, but somehow that made them fit better than ever. When our eyes met, Amanda didn't speak. She didn't wave. She only gave a small, deliberate nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing staged. But in that tiny motion was everything she'd never said aloud. Apology, respect, gratitude, and something quieter, understanding. I returned the nod, almost imperceptibly. That was all we needed. The crowd began to disperse, officers exchanging salutes, civilians finding their way toward the docks. The sun had climbed higher, scattering diamonds of light across the water. A young lieutenant approached, crisp in his uniform, a sealed envelope in hand. "For you, ma'am," he said, his tone clipped, formal. He handed me the envelope bearing the red wax seal of naval procurement. I broke it open, unfolding the heavy paper inside. Vice Admiral Whitaker, Project Atlantic Shield, has passed recertification with full marks. Thank you for holding the line when we didn't. R. Langley. A smaller note was tucked beneath it, handwritten on cream stationery. P.S. Lily and Amanda send their regards. They say you taught them what strength looks like. I read it twice before folding it back into the envelope. There was no triumph in the words, no lingering resentment, just acknowledgement. The clean kind that comes only after truth has settled long enough to stop stinging. I smiled, not because I felt victorious, but because I finally didn't need to be. For years, I had thought that justice looked like revelation, a loud undoing, a public reckoning, but standing there in the sun, surrounded by the rhythm of discipline and the constant breath of the sea, I understood that the real end of a story is quiet. It happens when you no longer need to prove you were right. I looked toward the horizon. The water was alive with movement, gray ships cutting through blue waves, their wakes glittering like silver threads unraveling toward infinity. A destroyer turned slowly in formation, engines humming low. They once told me to stay quiet, I thought. But silence, in my world, means command. I tucked the envelope into my coat pocket and stepped toward the platform railing. The deck below was alive with motion, crewmen checking lines, officers issuing soft commands, every movement synchronized without waste. It was the same choreography that had guided me my entire career. Order without cruelty, strength without spectacle. The call came suddenly, clear and sharp through the loudspeaker. "Admiral on deck." The command echoed across the pier. In a single motion, the entire formation turned to face me. Hundreds of bodies moved as one, boots striking in unison. The sound hit like thunder against the concrete. I returned the salute, back straight, eyes locked on the horizon. The wind lifted the edge of the flag behind me, its shadow stretching long across the deck. For a heartbeat, I felt the entire weight of the journey, every dismissal, every silence, every misunderstanding that had built the path to this exact second. I thought of the reception a year ago, of Amanda's laughter slicing through that Charleston ballroom, of Harris's salute as we walked out the door. I thought of Langley's trembling hands, of Lily's frightened eyes, of the way the sea outside that night had mirrored everything, calm on the surface, chaos beneath. Now, the same sea lay still. The ceremony ended. Officers began to disperse again, voices rising in small, polite conversation. Harris appeared through the crowd, still sharp as ever, his uniform immaculate. He didn't need to speak. The nod we exchanged carried enough meaning for 10 conversations. Duty done. Line held. The afternoon light shifted, turning the water gold. I stepped down from the platform and began walking toward the pier. My heels clicked softly against the concrete, the sound almost swallowed by the wind. Each step carried the faint echo of years, of marches, of orders, of things built and lost and earned back again. Near the edge of the dock, I stopped. The horizon burned bright, endless. Somewhere out there, the Ticonderoga was gliding forward again, steady as always, its bow cutting through the sunlit water. I could almost hear the distant call of its engines, a low, constant heartbeat, the kind that reminded you that duty doesn't end with victory. It endures in the quiet after. A photographer approached, asked if I wanted an official portrait taken by the flag. I declined. This moment didn't need to be captured. It was already mine. Behind me, Amanda and Lily lingered near the viewing line, speaking softly to one another. Amanda turned once, her hand raised briefly in farewell, the faintest smile on her face. Lily waved. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of distance between us. Just space. Space earned. Not carved by pain, but shaped by understanding. I watched them walk away until they disappeared into the crowd. The harbor around me buzzed with quiet life. Officers calling to dockhands, gulls circling overhead, flags snapping in the breeze. Everything was alive with motion, yet nothing felt chaotic. It was all order, all balance, the rhythm of something that had always been bigger than any one person. I reached into my pocket and touched the edge of the envelope again, the wax seal cool against my fingers. Langley's words echoed softly in my mind, not as flattery, but as closure. Thank you for holding the line when we didn't. That was the work, holding the line, even when others let go, even when it cost you comfort, or family, or the illusion of belonging, especially then. The wind shifted again, catching the edges of my uniform, whipping it against my legs. I turned my face toward the sea and let the sunlight strike full against me. The horizon shimmered, silver, endless, infinite. The voice of the harbor master drifted faintly through the intercom, calling out instructions, ship numbers, clearance codes, the language of the sea, the same cadence that had carried me through every chapter of my life. I took a deep breath and felt it fill me. Salt, steel, sunlight, and peace. Behind me, the faint sound of footsteps drew closer. Harris again. "Permission to stand down, ma'am?" he asked quietly. "Granted, Commander." He saluted once, then turned and walked back toward the docks. I watched him go, then looked out again over the bay. The destroyers gleamed like mirrors under the afternoon sun, their silhouettes cutting clean lines against the sky. I stood there until the light began to fade, until the gold turned to copper and the first long shadows of evening stretched across the water. The wind kept moving, restless but constant. The flag above me snapped once more in perfect rhythm. Somewhere below, the tide shifted. The sound of it was soft, steady, like the heartbeat of everything I'd built, everything I'd fought for, everything I was finally at peace to leave in motion. And as the last sunlight hit the edge of the sea, I thought, not with pride, not with regret, but with the deep, wordless certainty that only comes from purpose fulfilled. My story began with silence. It ends the same way, by the sea, in command, among those who still understand what honor means.